Today we are going to propose to combat hate with what's currently going on within Asian communities during the pandemic, during COVID-19. So today what the problem is from 2019 to 2020, the overall hate crime declined, while hate crimes targeting Asians increased from 3 to 28 in New York and 7 to 15 in Los Angeles. The analysis released by the Center of the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University of San Bernardino this month examined hate crimes in 16 of America's largest cities. It revealed that while such crimes in 2020 decreased overall by 7%, those targeting Asian people rose by nearly 150%. Moving on. The advocacy group Stop AAPI Hate said it received more than 2,800 reports of hate incidents directed at Asian Americans nationwide last year. The group set up its online self-reporting tool at the start of the pandemic. And what it says over here is that almost 70% were verbal harassment, about 21% were shunning, about 8% was physical assault, and about 6% was coughing or being spit on, and about 8% was workplace discrimination or refusal of service. Moving on. And here are a list of just some documented events that have been taken down on this topic. An 89-year-old Chinese woman was slapped and set on fire by two people in Brooklyn, New York. A stranger on the New York subway slashed a 61-year-old Filipino American passenger's face with a box cutter. Asian American restaurant employees in New York City told the New York Times they now always go home early in fear of violence and harassment. An Asian American butcher shop owner in Sacramento, California, found a dead cat, likely intended for her, left in the store's parking lot. Police are still investigating it as a hate crime. An Asian American family celebrating a birthday at a restaurant in Carmel, California, was berated with racial slurs by a Trump-supporting tech executive. And several Asian American homeowners say they've been abused with racial slurs and had rocks thrown at their houses. The only Asian American lawmaker in the Kansas legislation says he was physically threatened in a bar by a patron who accused him of carrying the coronavirus. The New York police arrested a man who assaulted a woman during a protest against anti-Asian racism. A grieving family received a hateful letter on the day of their father's funeral telling them to pack up their bags and go back to the country where you belong. And a school board candidate of Vietnamese descent in Portland, Oregon, found a derogatory note with the words Kung Flu or Fu on her doorstep. And a medical worker of Filipino descent in Los Gatos, California, was shoved to the ground from behind by an assailant who told her to go back to China. Moving on. So these issues didn't just come out of anywhere. The government had a huge part in what ignited these hate crimes. A separate study revealed that the use of the coronavirus language to refer to the coronavirus, particularly by the GOP officials and conservative outlets, has already resulted in a shift in how many people in the US perceive Asian Americans. The first time the former president used the China virus was March 16th in 2020, and the following week saw an increase in anti-Asian hashtags and a rise in hate crimes. Internationally, health officials purposely avoiding attaching geography to the virus, as had been done in the past, to avoid casting blame, but Trump insisted on tying China to the COVID-19 at every turn. Moving on. Some have directly blamed the anti-China rhetoric of former President Donald Trump, who often made mention of the pandemic as a China virus or the Kung Flu. Although the Asian population grew faster than other major groups in the last US census, the community's stories are not widely covered in the media, and its concerns are not pulled by political parties. Some federal agencies do not even include the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in their definitions of racial minorities.
And I was in charge of looking up how we can bring awareness through social media. Social media platforms can be used to help spread awareness through individuals and communities. Specifically, the hashtag Stop AAP I Hate began to surface across social media platforms more as more light began to shed on the violence and discriminatory acts committed towards the Asian community. Through sharing and posting online news and stories, these platforms can be vital in spreading messages that are updating people in communities on what is happening around them. In a time where a majority of our news is reported and heard online, social media plays a major part in just how fast news is reached across to people around the world. Social media not only gives us a chance to ask the public and to help us hold individuals accountable for their wrong actions, but it also helps to dismantle the model minority myth by giving people a glimpse of the reality of being an Asian American today. And that was an excerpt from V.V. Yang in one of the Forbes articles that I found. And my other topic was also highlighting credible news sources. During the early stages of the pandemic, while a lot of information about the COVID-19 virus was still developing to the public, there were large amounts of hysteria being stoked by some of the media outlets, inciting fear and anger that was directed towards the Asian community around the world. A recent study shows that a rampant use of the China virus to refer to as the coronavirus, particularly by the conservative outlets, had a profound impact on how those in the United States see Asian Americans. And that was an excerpt by Kimi Yam by NBC News. Credible news outlets report unbiased narratives and rely on the facts rather than opinions of other analysts, such as other news outlets. Where other news outlets report incidents and look to shift blame, credible news outlets look to report actual testimonies and surveys from people directly involved at the scene. And at a time where hysteria and fear mongering were at an all-time high, rather than shifting blame for the cause of the virus and just exactly where it originated, these credible news outlets in the picture of the bottom right focus on developing facts from doctors who were working to cure and de-escalate the spread of the virus and the social stigma that ensued with the virus. Moving on.
Another topic that we wanted to bring awareness to was microaggressions against the community. Microaggressions are defined as unintentional or subtle forms of discriminations against any ethnic minority groups. But for this presentation, we wanted to focus on microaggressions against Asian Americans. Common microaggressions for Asian Americans include expecting high math or science intelligence and academic success of all Asians, assuming they're foreign born. As an example, asking, where are you actually from? What's your real name? Oh, wow, your English is so good. Teasing cultural values and communication styles that range away from white culture in the majority, and Asian stereotypes that are normalized and played off as harmless jokes in both the media and IRL. The issue is not discussed as other minority groups, maybe because the anger towards racism against Asian Americans is not nearly as widespread as the anger towards racism against other POCs. Moving on. The lack of media coverage on racial attacks against the community has contributed to the normalization of racism towards Asian Americans, to the point that the racism is hard to catch because it's so subtle. The devastating effects of COVID-19 have created incentive for racist attacks on not only the Chinese Americans, but South Asian Americans and Filipino Americans have also been harmed with higher mortality rates compared to other people of color and white Americans. Repeated exposure to microaggressions can cause Asian Americans to feel alienated as perpetual foreigners in their own country. These seemingly subtle acts of discrimination are detrimental to the mental health of the victims, discounting the long-standing societal belief that the discriminations that Asian Americans face does not qualify as racism. Moving on. A way that we can combat these microaggressions and make sure that we don't fall into believing them